it's one thing that I find is probably the hardest thing to shift is that mindset around what is the purpose of my work? I think a lot of people, number one, don't philosophize much about that, which probably isn't such a bad thing. But if we really come down to what is the intent of my work and what am I trying to achieve here, that's a whole shift into that mode of outcome thinking, right? We're optimizing in everything that we do to make an impact. You're going from quite a, what I would say would be quite a traditional organization where, and again, Intelligence is not unique like this. I would say the default in most businesses is tell me what you're going to build. That tends
Yeah.
to be the common currency that we use is just give me the idea. How do we build it? We seem to hold a lot of weight to ideas. We don't tend to talk much about the problem that we're trying to solve. And so what this means is typically you get trapped in that conversation about the old iron triangle. Is it on time, on budget, to scope? And really, most projects or the strategy execution, they're not trying to really focus on the outcome or even necessarily explicitly measure that they achieve that outcome. Typically, you're looking at those three dimensions again: on time, to scope, on budget. Did you hit all those items? Tick those boxes. Great, we're done. And often, from a project perspective, it's just getting the things done right. Is the schedule running okay? Now, the problem here is that there's a very low correlation to, okay, all this activity we're doing, does that actually achieve the outcome that we intended? And in fact, I think this is why it's a stat that something like 30% of projects, maybe more traditionally, it might be different now, but certainly back in the day, only 30% of them would actually achieve the outcome that they were originally intending to achieve, which is wild when you think about it. You throw a lot of money at these things. So, was that a similar journey that you had to go through? What did that look like having to go from a traditional way of working and here's the projects, go do this thing, to here's the problem, here's the outcome we're trying to make?
So it was interesting. I remember I read the book. I remember actually going through the book really fast. And as sometimes, I'll speak for myself, as sometimes I tend to do, if I read or acquire new knowledge, I delude myself into believing now I know all the things about the thing, right? Says it this is easy. John Doerr, he's got it down. I can just write these on the back of a napkin and they'll be easy, right? So I went into the office with a new team and I said, guys, we're going to do all this. We're going to do OKRs. And I started writing on a whiteboard OKRs, what I thought were OKRs. And obviously the punchline, there's a spoiler alert, right? Which it was nowhere near that easy. And basically what I was doing is manifesting my thinking around how I had done everything in my life essentially for work, which was output based, and pretended like I was going to measure something about the output, right? And there's the difficulty, right? Which is, okay, you have to really think and deconstruct. The way my brain thinks about this is I look at the thing we're talking about doing and then I deconstruct and try to figure out what is going to change about anything in the business because we're exerting this effort, right? There's effort being put into the system. And so what is going to change by doing that? Then that's where I am now in more evolution. But even back then in those early days in 2019, 2020, I was trying to explore agile mindset and agile ways of working. And we definitely had some missteps in that space early on, but it was all related. And then in hindsight, you see it now. Oh, agility, that sort of has a relationship to outcome thinking, systems thinking, all these other things that we've done, product thinking, all this other stuff that we're now into, all start to fit into a puzzle pretty well. That was what the effort was, and it was across the company. We had workshops, and it was hard to get people to really understand outcomes because they kept trying to get to things of certainty. But you're going to, and we can talk about this later, but there's going to be a performance evaluation, right? There's going to be a grade, and so therefore I have to make sure that it looks good and it's the right thing and all. Yeah, so we got into that conversation.
So I think that's a really good call out. Let's jump into that now. So it's one thing that I find is probably the hardest thing to shift is that mindset around what is the purpose of my work? I think a lot of people, number one, don't philosophize much about that, which probably isn't such a bad thing. But if we really come down to what is the intent of my work and what am I trying to achieve here, that's a whole shift into that mode of outcome thinking, right? We're optimizing in everything that we do to make an impact. And what I see a lot of organizations typically struggle with is that shift away from, okay, here's, and particularly, I think one thing that I would imagine is very hard for Intellios is you've got this pretty structured way of working with customers. You're a certification body. And so traditionally it was, did you do the test? Did you pass? Did you complete all the right sort of information in there? From your organization's perspective, did we put all the right questions in there to make sure people are answering things in the right way? Are people learning from our content? So there's all these different dimensions to be thinking about. And it is often much easier just to simplify it and just go, here's a list of questions that works. Here's a set of learning material. Stick with that and just pushing that out into the customers, right? Really, rather than questioning, well, does that process make the impact that we want to have, which is better patient outcomes? So let's unpack that mindset and journey that the team had to on to really focus on the outcomes and the impact that they're making.
I don't think it was necessarily for this one reason, but part of the journey was understanding that some of that team was not going to be with us for the whole journey for different reasons. People opt out. They're like, you know what? I don't want to work in a situation like this. And that's totally fair as well. I think that obviously you and I are talking about this because we believe in this stuff. I think you shortchange yourself if you try not to lean into it, but fair enough. So part of it was people departed the team. Okay, so now you have a renewal, right? I see that as a renewal because you get in new people from different backgrounds. So the mind is maybe a little bit more open there because they don't have all that legacy already of baggage with them. So that was part of it. I think the other part of it was, for me, really trying to explain and manifest the difference between why we together set OKRs. And so I think that's an operative word there that's important, right? We aren't talking about individual people or OKRs, because people make that mistake, right? And you have the benefit again of hindsight and all the things and all the learnings that we've done over the years, but don't do that. Don't put OKRs on individual people because that will become their proxy to performance, right? So first thing is we're not going to do these things as individual assignments, right? Number one. But then the second part is, but we have to work within the constraints of what performance systems are traditionally. Fine. So that is where things like goals and more output-based things are, let's say, useful, right? Because the outcome, let's face it, it's probably a little cynical, but for me, the outcome of a performance system evaluation is, can I please get the money at the end of all of that? That's the reward. So great. So then what we've done here is we've actually split goals so that you get one goal, only one. You can have more than one if you want, if there's something more there that's interesting to you, but one goal per quarter, per person, generally speaking. Whether or not we decide that goal has something to do with the OKRs, the division or the team or the organization's on at that time, fine, but it's not mandatory. It does, sometimes it creates a nice glue to have those two things together, so fine. And so that was that big step was, let's think about goals as one thing for us as personal humans, and let's think about OKRs as change methodologies for the organization, a structure for the organization at large. And then you can, for me, you can move up and down. I see it in my mind as a stick, right? Or I don't know how, like a ruler or whatever a good visual for that is. There are places further down on the stick that are, let's say, closer to the heart of the matter of whatever your team is involved in. So as a tech person, the lowest part of that stick are things like, oh, our servers are crashing. So let's fix that and let's use OKRs to track the fix. And it's not the work to fix it, but it's how do we prove that we fixed it? Yeah. And then as you move through that hierarchy of needs on that stick, now we can start, once we got that out of the way, now we can start thinking about, great, our servers are no longer a problem and they're running super fast and super performant and it's elastic and all the orchestration is in place and blah, blah, blah. Now what kind of value can we unlock? And so now let's think about OKRs at that level. And that's how we've tried to progress the team down the journey that way.
All right, let me pick up what you're putting down there because we covered quite a lot of ground. What I think you really called out there early on was team OKR should be there about solving a problem that is measuring real change and impact. And if we can frame that in the right way, teams can measure their progress towards solving that problem. I liked as well that you talked about it is about moving up and down multiple layers. I think quite often, and this is a skill that I've always appreciated that I've had, is I'm able to navigate different layers of an organization quite effectively. The whole hierarchy thing's never really concerned me, but I look to a path of how do I navigate through this to drive the right outcome. And OKRs give you really nice means to transcend that and work up and down that model. At the same time, I think it is that actually too from team members, so individual contributors, they can go and have these sort of conversations. They can get context around what they're working on and why. And same for executives. So it works both ways, which is really powerful. That strategy link, again, is super critical. So really being clear on why does the work I'm doing now matter and why does it matter right now? Where things go work really well is it is about that driving and improvement and change, and it's strategically significant. And to your point, I think like people talk about servers, often we hear OKRs where it's about don't have any outages or these kind of things. I think when things are broken, you can use OKRs to fix them, and it's quite a nice way of going, okay, how do we improve and operationalize this in the most effective way? Often that is additive. We're trying to improve things or do new things, but it also might be reductionist, where we're taking certain things away or decommissioning certain things. But ultimately, we need to be measuring what's the impact and the benefit that we're trying to drive there. When it comes to individual OKRs or goals, I think we need to be really careful. I don't typically like OKRs for individuals. I think the team performance comes down to team performance. It's very hard to tie back who did what to drive that outcome. What seems to work really well for me, though, is if there's developmental goals that we're trying to achieve to help the organization's strategy, and it's an area of development that I'm interested in. It could be about acquiring new skills. Maybe we want to get better at public speaking, but all those things come together. And so you've got your OKRs, which really link you into strategy, help you drive strategy, help you have conversations across the business about strategy. And then there's your personal goals that are about how do I get better and improve. But having those two things as separate is quite important. There is a way to link OKRs, but it's a whole different conversation. I don't know if I just put down more than what you're putting down, but does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think even you touched on like the AWS example where we may have, okay, so I'll just make up the example, right? We have an OKR because we have a server that's in bad shape, or we have legacy technology, right? We know that we have this technology debt in our organization. And okay, there's a point of view there. We're going to reduce that tech debt. Great. As an incumbent in the organization, I already have, hopefully, you already have the technical skills that are required to improve what you have, right? Maybe you haven't had time. There's some other reasons that hasn't been given the right attention. So we can unblock some of that. But you already have the skills. There's no point in a goal that quarter saying, go learn more about the thing you already know how to do. Instead, the goal is go learn about the thing that's going to get us out of this for good, the next move that we're going to make. And so it's trying to anticipate where we're going and learn about that, or yeah, exactly. That's it.